Good afternoon. I think everyone knows that today is a special day. It's one of 4 special holy days in the year according to the Tibetan calendar. And today celebrates the Buddha's first teaching of the Dharma. And that took place 49 days after his enlightenment. And it took place at Deer Park near Varanasi in India. And this day is known as Wheel Turning Day, the day the Buddha first turned the wheel of Dharma. Have you ever wondered why they use this expression, turning the wheel of Dharma? So I did a little research, and it seems that the wheel is an ancient Indian symbol. It's also used in Hinduism and Jainism, and it has a lot of different meanings, significances. It's also one of the 8 auspicious symbols, which we often have decorating prayer flags and tablecloths and so on. And that those 8 auspicious symbols also originated in ancient India. So I'm not going to go through all the different symbolisms, but Vasubandhu in his text Abbey Kosha, which means treasury of manifest knowledge, says that in the case of the Buddha's teaching, talking about the Buddha turning the wheel of Dharma, the wheel represents the path of seeing. So the path of seeing, in case you're not familiar, is a realization, the very important realization. It's when one attains the first direct realization of emptiness, the true nature of all things. And upon attaining that realization, you become an Arya. So it's a really important milestone along the path. From that time on, there's no turning back. You just keep going until you reach either nirvana or enlightenment, whatever you're aiming for. So how does this wheel represent the path of seeing? So when the Buddha gave his first teaching, this took place, in Deer Park near Varanasi, and the audience consisted of these 5 men who Buddha had been meditating with, practicing with for some time, but then they had a little split. He went off and attained enlightenment. He came back and met them. And he taught them the 4 truths of Aryas, the 4 Noble Truths, and also the Eightfold Path. And upon hearing this teaching, one of those 5 disciples, whose name was Kondana, that's the Pali name, and in Tibetan I'm not sure, but I also came across the name Kudina, something like that. So that one disciple attained the path of seeing. So he realized emptiness, the true nature of all things. And a commentary to the Vasubandhu's text, which is, they call it the Chimzu commentary. It's a Tibetan commentary, which is very popular. So in that commentary it says, when the path of seeing was produced in Kudina, it is said that the wheel of Dharma was turned. But we still may wonder, well, what's the relation between a wheel and the path of seeing? So Vasubandhu says that the wheel of Dharma, meaning the path of seeing, is similar to the precious wheel of the Chakravartin, or wheel-turning king. So this is also an ancient Indian story about this person who's called the wheel-turning king, or the Chakravartin. And this person, it's actually a human being. It's quite interesting. You can be born as a Chakravartin. In fact, maybe we were in our past lives. You have to create a huge amount of merit to have this rebirth. And the Chakravartin king has all the same signs and marks as a Buddha. 32 major signs and it's 32 major and 80 minor signs of a Buddha, but they're not quite as clear and distinct as they are in the Buddha. And doesn't have the same realizations and qualities. But it's, it's the result of a great deal of merit. And this Chakravartin is said to be the ruler over a whole universe consisting of Mount Meru, 4 continents, and so on. And he has these 7 precious things, which we offer in the mandala. Precious wheel, precious jewel, and so on. And the precious wheel, I read a description by Lama Zopa Rinpoche. It's actually a vehicle, and it can carry the king and his whole entourage and his army around the universe. And very quickly, like in one whole day, you can visit the whole universe. And also the wheel enables them to subdue any adversaries in a peaceful way, in a non-violent way, not with force. So it sounds a bit like a flying saucer, or maybe Air Force One, carrying the president and his whole entourage around the world. Anyway, it's a vehicle and it moves very fast. So Vasubandhu says the path of seeing is like the precious wheel because it moves very fast. It's just one instant. So in one instant, one goes from being an ordinary being to being an Arya. And again, that's a very significant point on the path. And also the path of seeing is able to subdue adversaries in the sense of the afflictive emotions. Not all of them, but a big chunk of these afflictions get eliminated by the path of seeing in a peaceful way, non-violent way. So there's some similarities, according to Vasubandhu, between the precious wheel and the path of seeing. So anyway, back to our story. When the Buddha gave his first teachings, 1 disciple attained the path of seeing, and the other 4 continued to meditate on what the Buddha taught, and over the next few days, they also attained the path of seeing. So they all became Aryas. So the first teaching that the Buddha gave is quite famous. A lot of people know about it. But the second teaching that the Buddha gave doesn't seem to be so well known. Do you know what it was? Anyone know? Anyway, I'll tell you. So it was given 5 days later, 5 days after the first one. And it was the same audience, these 5 disciples. And at that time he gave this sutra called the Anatta Lakkhana Sutra, which means sutra on the characteristic of non-self or selflessness. And I really like it. It's really cool. So he taught selflessness. And it's not very long, but I won't read it. I'll just give you the synopsis. You can read it on your own. So the Buddha first goes through the 5 aggregates one by one, saying that none of them is the self. And he says, for example, form. He starts with the form aggregate, our body. He says, if form were the self, it would not lead to affliction or suffering. And one could have of form whatever we want. We could say, let my form be thus and not thus, and it would be. But since form is not the self, it does lead to affliction, and we can't have it the way we want. So in this sutra, the Buddha doesn't specify what type of self he's talking about, because there are different views of self, different notions of self. He just said self. But to me, my guess, and I could be wrong, is it's not the inherently existing self. He's not explicitly saying inherently existing self, but it sounds like a coarser type of false self, the substantially existent self. This is the one, we all have this in our mind. We all have this notion of a self that seems to be a controller and a ruler of our aggregates, like a boss, the one in charge, that's making decisions and controlling things. So it said we all have this innate notion of that type of self. You can notice it sometimes, like there's something in charge. Seems to be there anyway. And some of the religious and spiritual teachers of that time did believe in that kind of self and taught it. So it's quite possible that the 5 first disciples had learned about this and even believed in it. So I think that's what the Buddha was talking about, that type of self. And if that type of self did exist, then it should be able to control things. It should be able to make our body free of suffering. You know, nobody wants suffering. Nobody wants sickness or pain or any kind of bad things happening to our body. So the self should be able to prevent those things from happening. But does it? And also, it should be able to make our body the way we want it to be. We could have this perfect, beautiful, fantastic body, just the way we want it to look. But is that anyone's experience? You can do that on Facebook. You know, you can sort of touch up the photos and make yourself look the way you want to. But in reality, can we do that? And so the Buddha repeated this with each of the 5 aggregates, feeling, discrimination, and so on, saying each one was not the self. And then again, he went through the 5 aggregates one by one. And this time he asked the 5 disciples if they were permanent or impermanent. And they all said impermanent. Are they subject to happiness or suffering? And they all said suffering. Then finally he asked them if what is impermanent and subject to suffering fit to be regarded as this is mine, this is me, this is myself. And they replied no to all of these. And then the Buddha sort of wraps up this whole discussion by saying, all form, and so on, form, feelings, discriminations, abstract composites, and consciousness, 5 aggregates, all of these should be seen as they really are with correct wisdom in this way. This is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. So again, I'm just making a synopsis of it. But while listening to this discourse, all the 5 disciples became arhats. So they all reached nirvana, meaning their minds became totally free of all afflictive emotions, ignorance, greed, hatred, all the seeds and so on of those. Free forever from suffering, the cause of suffering, rebirth, and so on, free from samsara. So that's a pretty important teaching. I don't know why it doesn't get as much attention as the first turning of the wheel. Of course, it needed to be preceded by that. So even though in this teaching the Buddha didn't explicitly talk about the emptiness of inherent existence of the self, the Madhyamaka Prasangika school would say that since these 5 disciples attained the state of arhat, they attained nirvana, that's what they realized. They must have realized emptiness of inherent existence, not just of the self, but of all phenomena. Because according to the Prasangikas, that's what it takes to become an arhat. To become an arhat, to become free of samsara, you have to have that realization of emptiness of inherent existence. That's the subtlest level of emptiness or selflessness. So they must have realized that. And in fact, they must have realized that kind of emptiness even before that, because to attain the path of seeing, you have to have that realization. So that's just my take on this story. There's a lot of points here that, you know, we could think about and discuss and so on. But if you're interested in learning more about how selflessness and emptiness are talked about in the Pali tradition, then you can look in Volume 7, Searching for the Self, and also Volume 8, Realizing the Profound View. Because both of these books have several chapters about the Pali tradition, how the Pali tradition, Pali canon talks about selflessness and emptiness. There's a lot of really interesting things in there. Because usually in our tradition, we only hear about how emptiness and selflessness are explained according to the Indo-Tibetan tradition, you know, the Nalanda masters, the Tibetan masters, and so on, but we don't have much chance to hear about the Pali tradition. So there's a good source for that. So let's rejoice and feel grateful that we have this opportunity to learn these amazing, precious teachings of the Buddha, which enable one to totally eliminate all the causes of suffering from our minds and to attain these amazing states of liberation, nirvana, and the highest state, awakening. And there's still a few hours left of this special day to accumulate merit, because it said that on this day, on these, you know, these 4 special days, any merit accumulated is multiplied 100 million times. So that's a really good opportunity to create a lot of merit. So take advantage of that. And, you know, if you have the time and energy to do special things, that's good. But even just eating and doing offering service and taking a bath and whatever, taking a shower, you know, we can transform these into Dharma activities that create merit. And then don't forget to dedicate all this merit, all this positive energy to enlightenment for all sentient beings.